Well, I actually had a fairly large company contact me not long ago, and that's one of the things they ask is, how do we know if a business associate is compliant? And, I told them, I said, this is going to blow your mind, but ask them. And he's like, really?
You're listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, where HIPAA and humor collide to make learning fun. Your delightful hosts are Donna Grindle and David Sims. Relax. HIPAA help is on the way.
Welcome to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, where we help you with HIPAA, in case you didn't know. So, to all the new listeners, we'd like to thank you for listening. My name is David Sims. I'm one of your hosts today, and my co-host is the lovely Donna Grindle.
Dun, 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 dun.
Hold your applause, please. How's your day going, Donna?
I'm thrilled to be here with you, David.
You should be.
It's making my day.
Absolutely. So today on the agenda, we have to BAA or not to BAA. That is the question.
Yes.
And so what we're talking about is business associate agreements. There's a lot of discussions around whether or not a person should sign a BAA or should they not. Sometimes people get too crazy with it. They want everybody to sign a BAA. Yeah. Sometimes they get too not crazy with it. And they're like, oh, no. We don't need to sign that. We're not bound by HIPAA, so we don't need to sign that. Because if we sign it, all of a sudden, miraculously and mysteriously and magically, we must conform to its compliance. And that's not the case either. So let's dive into whether or not we want to BAA or not to BAA. What do you say?
I thought you were going to do to BA or not to BA.
To BA or not to BA is the question. Friends, Romans, countrymen.
Oh, good God. All right. So, you're right. It is very complex, and throwing everybody under a business associate agreement is like throwing everybody under a bus. I get these. I sent this to my heating and air guy, and he said he wasn't signing it. Well, you shouldn't have sent it to him.
He was correct.
He is correct. He should not sign it. However, we also have, I sent this to my collections company, and they said they're not signing it. Okay, that's a different problem.
Yeah. Or from the IT standpoint, I got this thing called a BAA. I just signed it and sent it back.
Yeah, there's the flip side. That's the problem as well.
Yeah.
So for those who think they're not going to sign it, it doesn't really matter. If you're doing the work of a BA, you are obligated whether or not you sign it. That does not. The final rule says if you're doing the work, that makes you a BA. If you haven't signed the contract, that just makes you more out of compliance.
Mm-hmm. It's what you do.
Yeah. It's all about the do of the do. What is you do? So clearly, it can get complicated, and the complexity is only increasing as we're starting to understand just what it means to have BAs, to have BAs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because now we have that compliance level. So there's areas where examples are, the dietitians at the hospital do have to have a certain amount of business associate type knowledge, but they don't actually take possession of it. They just, it goes through the orders more or less. This patient needs these things. Make sure that's on, their plate, and that's it. So, if you outsource the dietitian, because, they outsource things, now do they have to be a BA? Or is the medical director of some sort of an entity, or if they're not a workforce member, are they a BA? Are they an agent? So you have to figure all of those out. And an example I heard that was really interesting to me is these hospitals, they're forming the ACOs, the Accountable Care Organizations. So they'll form it, they'll make it a legal entity all of its own, but the hospital's actually running it. And then they sign up the practices that work with the hospital into this ACO, and they're functioning as a separate entity. However, it's staffed by the hospital, and the IT people provide services to the ACO. So now your IT company would be your BA, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you're really the hospital, but you're not the hospital. So essentially the BA is a BA of itself.
Okay, hold on. Let me get my flow chart.
Yeah. Yeah, it becomes that complex because the ACO is used in the hospital. So while the hospital is technically the ACO, by the hospital providing services to the ACO, then they are a business associate of the ACO, which is actually them.
Mm.
Yeah, it's all about legal entities and craziness. So, but this is, and we don't make this a featured element of our podcast. We do put it at the end so that we can have that legal stuff. We're not attorneys. We're not giving you legal advice. Please don't think we are. You really, really, really need an attorney to help you make these decisions when they are complex environments, because you need that legal opinion, the legal analysis of how your business agreement is between you. But we get these questions all the time, and it really goes down to, okay, who's the legal entity and how is your business relationship set up? And then what data is going to be exchanged to meet the requirements of that business relationship? So there you go. It's complicated, right, David?
Yes, I will rewind it and listen again.
So one of the areas that comes up often is the discussion about maintaining PHI versus maintaining facilities that have PHI, and who is a BA. And that is the quintessential scenario is to BA or not to BA. That is indeed the question with the data center areas, because it depends on how you look at it. And I was sitting in on the webcast of a OCR NIST conference, and they had 3 lawyers at the table, and they bring up this question. And
they're at the bar.
Yeah. So they bring up this question of, if I work with a data center, and we're talking about a data center, we're not talking about leasing a server, a virtual server. I'm talking, I go to a data center, I buy basically lease space from them. It's a locked cage where we put our servers inside this locked cage. They're responsible for giving me power, internet connection, backup power, all kinds of facility security, those kind of things. But that's it. They don't have a key to get into the cage where the servers sit. They're just there to provide that physical home for the server. So one argument is they're not a BA because they're just a landlord, and you don't have to make your landlord be a BA. And the other argument is, well, you just said that they're providing the physical safeguards for your server, and if they're providing part of your obligations under HIPAA, it would then kind of be an extension that they're a BA. Mm-hmm. What do you think, David?
I think that they should be a BA.
You say BA. Well, and it's a tough call. And I'll tell you that table, 2 out of the 3 lawyers said they should be a BA. So then they polled the room, and the room's full of people that are OCR people, lawyers, technical people, compliance companies, people that do things like us, right? Mm-hmm. And the majority of the people in the room also agreed they should be a BA. But it's important to note that you still had people that said that they could argue it, and they were sticking to their argument that they weren't. And that kind of makes it clear just how confusing it is. It makes it clear how unclear it can be. And you need your attorney to help you make those decisions when you get in those complex environments, if there is a debate, so that you have a legal opinion to help you through. But I thought one of the interesting points that one of the attorneys made that believed they should be a BA and not just a landlord, they talked about a specific resolution that occurred in the very beginning of the resolution agreement. So it was like early on, once the new rules were put in place with HIPAA, the high-tech rule. And it was Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee was moving their offices, and they left a closet full of old hard drives at the old office. Mm. And they moved out, and the only thing that was still there were these drives. So then when they're discovered and they're covered with PHI, as you can imagine, that's why they were in a locked closet. they came, and they're like, well, our landlord was watching after it, so we were going to come back and get it. It'll be okay.
The landlord signed a BAA.
And that was what the attorney said. And so if that is your argument, then you should have a BAA with your landlord, which brings us right back around into the loop that, it's even a landlord environment. If they're protecting PHI for you, now they become a BA instead of just someone that's leasing you space and you're responsible for the security. And I thought it was an interesting loop back around that they made. And in that particular case, they were pointing out that, yes, while the resolution didn't specifically talk about the business associate agreement or not, it was kind of we're blowing off that argument. We're not even going to talk about it kind of thing. You did not provide the proper security, and they didn't accept that argument at all. So it was a pretty expensive. I mean, we're talking that may have been like a $4 million deal. It was several $1 million that Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee paid after leaving those drives just sitting in a closet. So, it showed that the OCR lawyers involved in that investigation said, okay, we're not even going to go down that path. We're not even going to make it part of the conversation. Now, if you look at it the other way around, though, if you sell server space, store encrypted PHI, any of those kind of things, the entire room said, nope, the guidance says that you are a BA. And there's still people that will argue that, but it was interesting to see that all the lawyers, pretty much everybody in the room said, nope, you're a BA, you need a BAA, even if you're storing encrypted PHI. And you and I both know there's a lot of people that still don't accept that.
Mm-hmm.
And they argue it a long time to the point that I'm just like, I'm not going to email you anymore. I know where you stand. You know where I stand. We're done. Peace out. So that goes back to the important part that we said earlier. It doesn't really matter whether you signed a contract. If OCR decides that you are indeed a business associate, whether or not you signed it is irrelevant. So if something happens and you are deemed a business associate, you're going to be held liable, as well as the customers, the clients you have are then going to have an issue of, well, are they liable for not pushing that point when you said, I can prove by my attorney's argument that I'm not one? Right. What would you do, David?
I would call 911.
Just before you passed out, right?
Because I'd be having a heart attack at the moment.
Just the stress of the whole decision. I know. That's why I'm just like, look, here's the rule. If you don't want to follow it, move on, because I don't want to have that debate. But the good news is supposedly soon, and that's really all they would say. But OCR is releasing a cloud computing guidance document.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Yeah. Well, especially when you consider that the security rule, and this was an interesting way to put it, the security rule was written earlier in this century. Early in the century. I mean, the law really came out in 96. They started working on it, and the security rule was officially implemented in 2005.
That's before the clouds.
Exactly. And they're like, it's long before cloud computing. At that time, everybody had, big servers in their office or, a server room, or they just didn't even use server kind of equipment back then. A small company just had some computers and didn't do much of anything online. Mm-hmm. So it was a big thing back even in the late 90s. You'd say, well, are you internet active? Do you have an internet connection?
How fast is your dial-up?
How fast is your dial-up? Do you have DSL yet? Because I don't think we can do this without DSL. So, the changes just in the last 10 years in computing has been dramatic, and cloud computing isn't even really addressed properly in the security rule. So that's why they feel, that everybody feels that it's needed, and they insist that it's coming out soon. But again, think about what that requires is a bunch of lawyers sitting in a room saying, what do we think? And everybody's got an opinion. You know about those, right?
Yeah, I wiped mine.
So, Moving right along.
It just shot you right.
Oh, I'm like, really?
Just when I think I know what he's going to say.
Yeah. You're doing this to me a lot lately. It's like that comment. Oh, if you're quirky and you don't like things that are boring and dull, you'll love them. They cross the line all the time, or just barely. We hop back and forth on either side of the line, and it's mostly you. So to bring it back around away from David. Oh no, but I was going to make a point about something you said. It is not the solution to make everybody sign a BAA, though.
That's what I said.
Yeah, it is. So while, you can debate back and forth, you need to make decisions about your business and be prepared to explain your logic of why you did or didn't do something, which then brings into question the next piece of this conversation, which is, okay, well, what should your contract include? So I don't know how many times you've read contracts, David, but I know it's exciting for most of us.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure where you do your reading.
There you go. Taking me to the bathroom again.
You form your opinions, right? About your contract. So it is,
very opinionated sometimes.
So again, we need to point out that we're not attorneys. Clearly, we're not attorneys.
Yeah, well, we would have big opinions.
Yeah. Oh, he's on a roll, folks. He's on a roll. So clearly, we're not an attorney. So you need to have legal advice on this stuff. There's plenty of templates. There's plenty of those things that you can get. But really and truly, for somebody that's not a HIPAA attorney, and I'm not saying get any attorney. Don't get a tax attorney to do your, hey, you're an attorney. Work this out for me, because it's very complex law. So you need someone that actually understands the complexities of the law. And you don't want to just accept what the vendor's attorney said, supposedly, either. You want somebody that's making a clear analysis of it from your perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But don't rely just on us. Can't reiterate that enough in here. But we do need to talk about things. If you read the contracts, you need to know what's in them. Whether an attorney says, well, that's a good contract. There you go. You're all taken care of. Sign it. But you don't know what's in it, then you're just as screwed as if you never signed it or never had an attorney, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a bad habit to get into. Just sign it because, from my end, from the IT end, it's okay, my client's paying me X number of dollars a month. I don't want to lose them as a client. They gave me this paper that said, business associate agreement, you have to sign this to do business with us. So I'm just going to sign it, because if I don't sign it, I'm going to lose them as a client.
Right.
Bad thing to do and not read.
Yeah. And I love this. Okay. We're going to do business together. We need to sign a BAA, and there's silence in it. Do you have one?
Yeah. Who's supposed to actually provide this thing?
Yeah. So know that both sides need to understand what's in these agreements and what's being committed to. So some of the things that are changing about what's in them because of the new environment is a big thing that everybody's saying. You hear a lot of the lawyers recommending that you put indemnification in there to make sure that if your business associate is the source of a breach, then they're responsible for covering any of the fees and things that happen as a result of their error. And it didn't used to be in there at all. If you look at a lot of the templates that you get that people have, that's not in there. But then I'll see that I've seen contracts where they'll say, yeah, they gave us an addendum to it. Down in the addendum, not only will you see indemnification stuff, but you may see specific requirements for the type of cybersecurity insurance you need. And those could be part of your negotiations. I mean, in a big group, they could say, hey, we want you to have $5 million cybersecurity policy, a $5 million liability policy. Well, a lot of the smaller companies don't do that. And we're not just talking IT here. We're talking any business associate. You may have that requirement. And the states are getting involved, and the states are starting to put requirements in. So if you work in multiple states, you may see different requirements that start popping up as the states try to get in here and get their piece of the pie, telling people what they have to do and to manage privacy and protect businesses from these breaches. And a big thing that I don't know about you, David, but my favorite thing to ask people when we start doing any kind of work with them is, okay, what is your standard business associate breach response time?
And they look at you like a deer in headlights.
It's like, wait, what? Yeah, okay, well, do you usually sign their contract or do you sign yours? Well, we usually sign theirs. Okay, so the most stringent one that you sign with them, that has to be your company policy. Well, why does it have to be that? Well, what are you going to do? Have 6? You know, how are you going to know which one to follow based on who it is? So you have to figure out the most stringent business associate agreement, and that's how your company should function, is under those rules. So you certainly don't want to just sign anything. You've got to be able to negotiate that down to where you are geared to be able to respond. And I thought something else that I heard that was interesting on business associate agreements. One of the things in the privacy rule, says that the de-identification of PHI, that you're allowed to do this. And so the big thing is that you can't sell PHI. You have to take out PHI so that people don't sell the data with it in there. You know how people do that.
Mm-hmm.
Happens all the time. And the lawyers were pointing out that, your doctor's name and things like that, once the patient information is removed, that information can stay in there because it's not identifiable except for the physicians and the offices. So now your data could be sold. So do you need to have something more concrete in your BAA that says de-identification of data? You can't sell it, even if it's de-identified.
Yeah. I would think so.
And do you say, okay, we'll share responsibility as long as you're acting in a reasonable manner to protect to meet your requirements, because we understand people make mistakes. So if it's reasonable and our lawyers decide that you were acting reasonably, then we'll share the burden. But if you're acting reckless, the whole thing's on you. It's not on me.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, there was a suggestion of, do you make the security rule, the things that are addressable, do you make it very specific? Do you require encryption? Do you make it where the security standards are very specific as to what you expect instead of the free form that HIPAA does? So these agreements are changing, and all those people that just sign them and move on, well, there's going to be an issue there.
Yeah, absolutely. I have some things I put in mind because, quite frankly, 80% of my client providers don't have a BAA. So
I know.
I have to bring mine.
Yeah. Do you have one?
That's I do have one. Yeah, I do have one.
Me too.
And it spells out, what we'll do, what we won't do. But I don't put things in mind that says you must have encryption and all that. However, not in the BAA, but in some other documentation that I have, I do require them to do that. If you want us to support that mobile device, it must be encrypted.
There are cases where the covered entities are not protecting themselves enough from reckless business associates, but it also goes the other way. There are a lot of IT people that are so frustrated trying to get their clients to do what they're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And, there's things they know about and they know it's not happening, and you're not in a position where you can turn them in. And there's purists that say, well, you're just going after the almighty dollar if you keep working with them. Well, you know what? If I keep working with them, at least I have a chance of trying to make them do the right thing. If I stop working with them and they hire somebody that doesn't care, then it's going to get worse.
Yeah. And I can tell you from the IT community standpoint, when this comes up, 9 out of 10 people are going to say, you need to drop that client and move on. Don't deal with them at all.
Right.
If they're not going to do HIPAA, which is their legal requirement, then you don't want them as a client because they're going to end up getting you in an audit or in trouble or something. And so drop them and leave them.
Yeah.
And that's the prevailing attitude from the IT community. And so, you need to think about that. If you're a provider, you're either going to get people who don't care, Or are you going to have people that are just going to say, no, I'm not taking you as a client because you're too much liability for me?
Well, and the ones that don't care, they're going to be fine with that. And let those people go. But, I struggle with that answer all the time because people ask for, this, and this is the case. What do I do? And it's very complicated. From the covered entity, it's pretty straightforward. I'm not, I'm going to find somebody else to do the business with. From a business associate standpoint, you don't know until you get in there necessarily how bad it is. So that's another reason. One of the things that really you should be doing is assessing your BAs, but it's a fine line that a lot of people are like, because you're not liable. Once they sign a BAA, it says, unless you're aware of a pattern of non-compliance, then you're not liable for what they may do. But on the other hand, do you want to be unaware of how bad it's going to be and let the hammer land if it does? Or do you want to be aware in advance and try to deal with the problem? So it's the same kind of thing going the other way. So that whole reminder of non-compliance thing is, what part of that scary little dark closet do you want to open that closet door? Let's make a deal. What door would you like to open, or would you like them all shut tight and see what comes busting out after you at some point? So clearly, it's an important process to decide how much you're going to ask them. But in my opinion, and, we've talked about opinions, I want to know. I'm not going to put my head in the sand and ignore them. And I'm going to try to get them to do what they're supposed to do. But in doing these assessments, you ask the questions, and it's surprising how many of these answers, because we help do these assessments. And, we got 28 questions. They're not complicated. It's do you know you're supposed to do this kind of stuff? And, when was the last time you held training? What kind of training was it? And you'll be surprised what some of these answers are of people that'll say, yes, I know I'm supposed to do it, but no, I'm not doing any of it. Like, wait,
Or, wait a minute, I'm SAS 70 certified or SSAE 16 certified, so therefore I'm HIPAA compliant.
Right, and they're not the same.
I'm PCI compliant. I don't have to be HIPAA compliant.
Oh, yeah, I had one of those. We're PCI compliant. We don't have they're not the same at all. And, you have to decide if you're going to accept that. And a lot of people will say, well, we've been audited. We had the SOC audit or we've had this audit, but they're not telling you the results of the audit necessarily to say, well, yeah, we had it. And they said we're in big trouble, but you don't need to know that part. Psst, sweep that under the rug.
Yeah.
So know that as more of this comes down the pike, it
depends on what you're doing.
Yeah. But as more as this comes along, they're changing these agreements. So you need to be more involved in them, no matter what, whether you're the upstream BA, downstream BA, CE, you need to be more involved in understanding these and the situations you're creating for your company. A really great question to ask a cloud provider, for example, because we talk, we're big proponents of the cloud, you and I. And at the same time, do you know where your PHI lives? Do you know? Do you really know? Have you asked them? Because if it's offshore, what happens to HIPAA when your data isn't in the United States anymore?
Well, from what I have read, they come after the person that they can get to the easiest.
Yes.
So that might be you.
I know. You don't know who it's going to be. It's going to be who's got the most insurance, who's the easiest to, come down on, because you never know what's going to happen. So asking these questions is fair. And for BAs to get all bent out of shape because you asked the question, we can't believe you're asking this. If you were doing this, you'd be happy to answer it. I've had some BAs that say, I love that you sent me this because it made my team sit down and review and make sure we are doing these things that we should be doing, because nobody is asking.
Or you get the ones that says, I'm glad you sent me this. However, it's a little bit extreme, don't you think?
You're right. I love those. Clearly, you take this way more seriously than we do. So it's something that needs to be asked. It's something that needs to be evaluated. And, sometimes when you've got two companies that are tech companies or you've got technical staff working, just get everybody else out of the way and, let the geeks talk because they're going to know. If you've got your own geek, let them talk to their geeks and you'll know what they have. We can have a conversation with somebody in 5 minutes. We'll know way more about their security and what they do at their office than most people ever know in a questionnaire or anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You got nothing else to offer about that? You've never had a conversation with somebody and you call them up and, hey, I just, want to get us on the same page. And then you feel the page get ripped out of the book.
Yeah. Especially when you're talking anything around security and compliance, it tends to be one of those conversations where you tell them and then you say, okay, now that I've told you, let me go back and tell you again so that you'll understand it the second time. Because the first time is I told you what you wanted to know the first time, but now let me tell you how you can understand it.
Yeah. It's definitely one of those things that it's becoming so important that if you're a business associate, I'm telling people that are business associates that you need to fill out a questionnaire that we would send other business associates and then go ahead and send it to your clients. Go ahead and say, here you go. Make it part of it needs to be part of what stands you apart from the competition is that you are actively pursuing these things. And even if your clients are just starting to wake up from the snooze of what used to be HIPAA, they're going to appreciate it in the long run. And it'll get their attention to see maybe I should be asking about this from other people. And it'll help you out in the long run either way. Of course, that means you have to fill out the questionnaire and tell the truth that you're actually doing the things that you're supposed to be doing. There's that.
Yeah. Well, I actually had a fairly large company contact me not long ago, and that's one of the things they ask is, how do we know if a business associate is compliant? And, I told him, I said, this is going to blow your mind, but ask them. And he's like, really? And I was like, yeah, but it's not just say, hey, are you compliant? Ask questions like, what are you doing around your HIPAA training program? Tell me about that. Or tell me, who's in charge during a HIPAA breach or something like that. And they're going to either have a great answer for you or they're going to go like, I don't know. Let me get back to you on that.
It'll tell you right away, won't it?
Yeah. So it doesn't take long before a couple of questions on the phone, even though I think a solid questionnaire that you send them and have them fill out is better. But honestly, you can find out in less than a minute on the phone if they really are doing anything around HIPAA or not. Because if they're doing a proper training program, it shouldn't matter who you're talking to in the organization. They should be able to answer some basic questions like, who's your privacy and security officer? How do you spell HIPAA?
How often do you get training?
Yeah. Do you log out of your computer? Or, excuse me, do you know Susie's password and Janice's password? And so,
does everybody in the office use the same username and password to log in?
Yes, it's admin and password.
Well, there you have it.
And then after the fact, you should follow up with your business associates, right?
Yeah. You want to know, are they keeping up with the game, Did they do it 1 year and then whoever was in charge had to leave or got pregnant and is staying at home for a while? Now no one's paying attention, so it's just not happening because that happens.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of reasons that the program could be great and then the wheels fall off.
Yeah. Well, in any organization, I don't care if it's a hospital or a small provider, you're only as strong as the weakest link, and your BAs are part of that link. So you can't ignore them. You've got to look at what they're doing around compliance and security and protecting that patient information, because, the patient information protection is one of the things that you should be really, really looking at. And if you're handing part of that off to somebody, an IT company or shredding company or whatever, if you're handing part of that off to somebody, then they need to have the same diligence as you have, or more so, depending on what they're doing. But that's definitely something you don't just hand it off and go, oh, well, they signed a BAA, so it's all on them now. We're not worried about it, because it's definitely going to come back on you. Ask some of these people who've paid somebody to shred documents and they find them in a dumpster somewhere.
Right.
You don't indemnify yourself just because they signed a BAA. It's still going to get you one way or the other. If nothing else, it's going to get you from the fact that it's going to be all over the news.
Your reputation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even if you get to indemnify them and it's all on them, it's still your reputation. Why didn't you know?
Mm-hmm.
So it certainly happens.
So now you know. To BAA.
So basically what we've covered today is it's confusing to figure out who's a BA, and you can have multiple attorneys give you different opinions, so that doesn't make it any less confusing. It's confusing what you should have in the business associate agreement, and it's going to vary by state. And I would wager that if somebody's already had a breach, their agreements are going to be much more stringent than somebody that hasn't had one from a BA. So that is going to be confusing to know who you're going to sign, which one. Do I need a lawyer? Probably. And then you got to ask them questions and pay attention to their answers to be sure that if you've gotten through the confusing part, decided they're a BA, you've found a reasonable business associate agreement that meets your needs, you get them to sign it, and then you got to ask them some questions. And even then, they may not pass. So actually, we start, if it's a new contract, we start with make them answer the BA questionnaire first.
Then go from there.
Yeah, because there's a lot of them. You just kind of, okay, you're out. Don't waste anybody's time. Just send them that, Get their answers. Yep. Okay. Now we're down to 3. It's a whole lot easier. So there you have it.
There we have it.
And
there you have it, folks.
All I have to say about that.
Is that all you have to say about that?
Yes.
All right. If you enjoyed this episode, head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review. Tell us how great I am. And you can mention Donna if you want to. I don't really care. But head on to our website at www.helpmewithhipaa.com. If you have a question, you can leave it right there on the website, and we might feature your question in a future episode. So from me to you, remember, HIPAA is not about compliance. It's about patient care.
You've been listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, hosted by Donna Grindle and David Sims. The show created to help you with HIPAA. For more information or to ask us a question, visit our website at helpmewithhipaa.com. Neither Donna Grindle or David Sims are attorneys, and they do not offer binding legal advice concerning regulatory compliance. The information in this podcast should not be relied upon or construed as legal advice in any way. Consult your attorney for legal advice concerning compliance with HIPAA regulations.